Hi, good evening, everyone. Everyone is eagerly waiting for the announcement of the prestigious Oral Presentation Award for Liver and Gastro for the year 2021. For the liver session, we have two winners. They had a tie up, so we have to give it to both of them. One is Dr. Pooja Selwal from AIMS Rishikesh, and the other one is Dr. Arya Shushmita from ILBS. Dr. Pooja is going to talk on a prospective observational study of hepatic dysfunction in children on anti-tuberculous drug. Over to you, Dr. Pooja.
So, good evening, respected faculties, seniors, and dear colleagues. I am myself, Dr. Pooja Singhwal, Senior Resident in Pediatric Gastro from AIMS Rishikesh. Here we are presenting a study entitled as Prospective Observational Study of Hepatic Dysfunction in Children on Anti-Tubercular Drugs. From the author's team, there is no conflict of interest to disclose. It has been seen that pediatric tuberculosis accounts for nearly 10% of all the cases of TB. Anti-tubercular drug-induced liver injury is one of the most common and severe adverse reaction to the TB treatment. Hepatotoxicity is a serious challenge during the treatment as well as at the time of reintroduction of the regimen. Incidence of TB DD varies from 2 to 28% as per the different study population or the different definitions used. Reported incidence has been seen as 6.9% in the adults and 13.9% in the children as per the latest studies. And TB-DD is associated with the high morbidity and the high mortalities. As there have been very few studies in India on TB-DD and evidence based on this topic is limited. Also, the reported studies use different definitions of DD. So standard definitions needs to be followed. And also in the previous studies, LFT monitoring was done in infrequent interval. So based on this heterogeneity of data in the reported studies, we aim to assess the frequency, risk factors, clinical pattern, and prognosis of anti-tubercular drug-induced liver injury in children. It was an institutional-based prospective observational study which was conducted in Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology in AIMS Rishikesh from 1st July 2019 to 31st December 2020, and ethical approval for the study was taken from IRB. Children of age group less than 18 years with confirmed pulmonary or extrapulmonary cases were included. Also, the presumed cases of tuberculosis in which the diagnosis was based on clinical lab or radiological features were also included. Children having pre-existing liver disease, viral hepatitis, concomitant hepatotoxic medication, baseline abnormal ALT, AST or bilirubin levels, or concomitant HIV infection or MDR tuberculosis were excluded from the study. Definition was adopted as per the standard definition given by the RNTCP, according to which TB-DD is defined as the children meeting any of the criteria, that is ALT-AST more than 3 times with symptoms, ALT-AST more than 5 times, or bilirubin more than 1.5, irrespective of the symptoms. Among the included patients, LFT was monitored first at 2 weeks and then at 4, 6, 8 weeks and 2 monthly till the completion of ATT regime. At any point of time, if any patient developed the DD, then ATT was stopped and LFT was monitored every 3rd day, and reintroduction of ATT was done in a sequential manner once the AST-ALT reaches less than 2 times of the upper limit of normals. Statistical analysis was done by the appropriate methods, and coming to our results, here we can see that total 81 patients were enrolled in the study after applying the excluding criteria. Out of 81, 71 patients completed the treatment. 4 patients were lost to follow-up after 2 months and 4 patients were expired. Among the study distribution, you can see that maximum patients were female and the most common age group of the included patients were 15 to 18 years. Outcome of our study population, out of 81, 10 patients developed the TB-DD and the 11 patients developed the hepatic adaptation, in which the LFT was deranged less than 5 times, but the patients were asymptomatic, and rest of the 60 patients were normal. When we see the time to develop the TB-DD from the starting of ATT, then we found that maximum patients developed the DD within first week, and none of the patients developed the DD after 3 weeks. Among the clinical presentation, we can see that all the patients having the DD were symptomatic, with the most common symptom was anorexia and vomiting, and jaundice was reported in the 3 patients. We have followed the LFT pattern in all the patients. In the DD patient, here we can see that mean value of the ALT was maximum 333, and after discontinuation of the drug, it was spontaneously reduced. It was showing a resolving trend, and similar pattern was observed for the total bilirubin levels. So when the ALT level we achieved as less than 2 times, then ATT was reintroduced in all the 10 patients. And the 8 patients tolerated well in a sequential manner, 9 to 24 days after the discontinuation. In the one patient, reintroduction was not possible because of the recurrent DD, and child was continued on non-hepatotoxic ATT. And in the one patient, it developed the acute liver failure and died. After this, we worked up to see the predictors of TB-DD, and we found that all the 10 patients of TB-DD, they were not significantly differed from the others with respect to the age, gender, and the type of tuberculosis. And after which we have seen the baseline parameters for all the patients, and we found that the baseline parameter in the children's having the TB-DD was significantly higher, like direct bilirubin level, ALT values, AST values, and the GGT values were significantly higher in the TB-DD group, with the p-value of less than 0.05 and the odd ratio of more than 1. Subsequently, on multivariate regression analysis, we found that higher baseline ALT was independently associated with the DD, with an adjusted odd ratio of 2.1 with the p-value of less than 0.01, and a baseline ALT value of more than 31 can possibly predict the DD with sensitivity 61% and a specificity of 74%. So on the basis of our study, we can conclude that TB-DD developed in 12.3% of the children receiving ATT. Successful reintroduction of ATT is possible in majority of the patients of TB-DD, and the baseline elevation of transaminases is a risk factor for TB-DD, and the baseline ALT value of more than 31 can possibly predict the DD. Thank you, sir.
Now, Dr. Arya Sushmita is going to talk on a study of adherence to medication in pediatric liver disease from ILBS. Over to you, Dr. Arya.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Right.
A very good evening to all respected judges. Myself, Arya Sushmita, from Institute of Liver and Biliary Sciences. Today's my topic of presentation is study of adherence to medication in pediatric liver disease. Medical adherence includes not only timely intake of medication, but also the follow-up and reporting all complications. It is a common problem across all disease spectrum, and percent prevalence varies between 20 to 80% between different diseases. At present, there is no adherence study in pediatric liver disease other than the post-transplant cases, and no studies in the Indian population. So with this lacunae, we planned the study with primary objective to assess the adherence to medication in pediatric liver disease and to identify variables affecting adherence to medication in pediatric liver disease. Study is prospective cross-sectional study conducted over the period of 6 months. We have included all patients below 18 years of age with primary diagnosis being a Wilson disease, autoimmune liver disease, or post-transplant patient, taking 2 or more drugs, taking medication for at least 3 months duration. There are several medication adherence scales, and we use medical adherence measures as it is already used and published in previous pediatric literature. For children less than 12 years of age, only parents were requested to fill up the form, whereas in more than 12 years of age, both patient and parents were requested to fill up the form. This questionnaire includes two parts. Part 1 includes demographic details and clinical profile of the patient, whereas this is the second part, which includes the details of medical adherence, and we have calculated the missed dose percentage and late dose percentage on the basis of this formula, and we define non-adherence if a person more than 20% of time either missed their dose or taking their medication late. It also includes the perceived barrier, system used to organize medication, time of the day was most difficult, and responsibility over the medication. We have also included 3 questions how COVID pandemic affects the medical adherence. Sample size was 150, and till date we have enrolled 152 patients, and half of them were less than 12 years of age. Drug non-adherence on the basis of mixed dose percentage was 12.4%, whereas on the basis of late dose percentage, it was 16.4%. In disease-wise drug non-adherence, as we've seen, the post-transplant patients were more compliant as compared to Wilson disease and autoimmune liver disease. And when we compare on the basis of missed dose percentage, the Wilson disease were more non-compliant as compared to post-transplant patient, where on the basis of missed dose percentage, autoimmune liver disease patients were more non-compliant as compared to Wilson and post-transplant patients. In perceived barrier, bad taste was most common. Bad taste, do not want to take or refuse medication, ran out of medication were most common barriers, and around 49.9% subjects had more than one barriers. Bad taste were more commonly reported in less than 12 years of age, whereas refusal to take in more commonly responded in more than 12 years of age. Missed dose percentage was directly correlated with the number of barriers, whereas inversely correlated with the ability to recall the medication. Whereas in late dose percentage, it is directly correlated with the number of barriers. When you come to system to organize, most commonly used system was plastic bag or plastic box, whereas the ideal system, that is pill box, only used by 3.3% of population. In more than 12 years of age, patients were primarily responsible for their medication intake, whereas in less than 12 years of age, parents were primary drug giver. We have come to conclusion that most of the patients did not discontinue their medication during COVID pandemic. If they discontinued, either drugs were not available or due to financial issues. Around 30% of patients did not turn up for routine follow-up. There, it shows on agreement analysis, it shows there is good agreement between patient more than 12 years of age and their parents on various responses like missed dose percentage, late dose percentage, number of barriers, and drug recall percentage. When we analyze the factor affecting the drug adherence on univariate analysis, person residing in rural areas, barrier as a hard to remember, bad taste, side effects, and older age at diagnosis were more non-compliant as compared to others. When we apply the multivariate logistic regression analysis, place of stay, hard to remember, bad taste, and older age at the current older age was more associated with the drug non-adherence. It is a single center study conducted during COVID pandemic, and so there is high risk of selection bias. Only more compliant patients likely to follow up even during pandemic period. Subgroup analysis was not able to attempt it due to limited sample size. So we come to the conclusion, drug non-adherence varies between 12 to 16%, and that is less than 1/5 of the patient, whereas factor independently associated with non-adherence was personal barrier, hard to remember, forgetfulness, and bad taste, and person staying in rural place and older age of the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, participants, for the excellent presentation. Thank you. We are moving to the Gastro Award paper, the best oral presentation for the year 2021 is done by Dr. Umesh Reddy from SGPGI, Lucknow, on efficiency of endoscopic dilatation and its impact on growth in children with benign esophageal stricture. Over to you, Dr. Umesh.
Yes, Umesh. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, respected judges and dear colleagues. I'm Venkat Umesh Reddy from SGPJ, Pediatric Gastroenterology. I'm presenting a paper titled Efficacy of Endoscopic Dilatation and its Impact on Growth in Children with Benign Esophageal Strictures, a large single center experience of 259 cases. There's no conflict of interest and study is not funded. Esophageal strictures pose a big challenge for pediatric gastroenterologists worldwide. Etiology of esophageal strictures in children are mostly benign causes like corrosive, anastomotic, and peptic strictures. Definitive management options include esophageal dilatation and surgery, either by resection anastomosis of a short segment stricture or esophageal replacement. Endoscopic management is considered the first line therapy for benign esophageal strictures in children. However, in the management of strictures in children, there remain some unanswered questions. Particularly, how successful is the endoscopic management, especially on the long-term outcomes on growth. For this, the literature is scarce. Study by Chang et al. In a study of 50 children showed improvement in weight after 12 months of balloon dilatation. Similarly, there is a query regarding the choice of dilator to be used, either bougie or balloon. There are no head-to-head comparative studies looking at the efficacy and safety of the different dilators. The aim of the study primarily was to evaluate the efficacy and safety of endoscopic bougie and balloon dilatation for benign esophageal strictures in children, and secondarily to evaluate the effect of endoscopic management on their growth and follow-up. In the methods, this is a prospectively kept database of 59 cases between June 1994 to March 2020 was analyzed retrospectively. Endoscopic dilatation was performed using the bougie, that is by the American Bar, and or the balloon. Balloon is the CRE, controlled expansion balloon dilator, at 2 to 3 weekly intervals. As a target, we have considered dilatation to be adequate and successful if the esophageal lumen could be dilated to 15 mm diameter in above 5 years, and if it is below 2 years, 11 mm diameter, 2 to 5 year age, 12 mm diameter, and with complete relief of symptoms for at least 2 months. In the inclusion criteria, all children with esophageal strictures were endoscopically managed were studied. Exclusion criteria, those children who were primarily managed with surgical management, and those children who were lost to follow-up during the study period were excluded. Children were grouped by the etiology, nature of the stricture, and the type of the dilator used, that is either the bougie or balloon, for comparisons. To assess the impact of dilatation on growth, baseline and follow-up weight and height Z-scores were calculated. This is a study flow chart. A total of 259 cases were initially taken. Their baseline symptoms, anthropometry and barium esophagogram were recorded. At outset, 41 are excluded because there was no dilatation done in view of the tight stricture and upfront surgery. And 30 cases were lost to follow-up with less than 5 dilatation sessions done before having achieved the primary target. Complete follow-up was present for 180 cases, and with partial follow-up of 38 cases. In the partial follow-up group, there were 32 cases which were lost to follow-up after at least 6 dilatation sessions done without achieving the primary target, and they were excluded from the outcome analysis. Unsuccessful dilatation and perforation occurred in 6 cases, which were managed thereafter. They were lost to follow-up. Complete follow-up group of 180, where successful dilatation 168 and unsuccessful dilatation in 12. Perforation occurred in 8. Primary target was still not achieved in 2 cases, and they are continuing on dilatation program. And in 2 cases, it was considered failed dilatation, and they were pushed for surgery. So, unsuccessful dilatation was achieved in 168 cases, of which 64 required further as-needed dilatation sessions, and in 104 there was no further requirement of as-needed dilatation sessions. In the results, the median age at presentation was 2.5 years, with successful dilatation being achieved in 168 out of 186, that is 90.32%. Coming to the etiological spectrum, the most common etiology was anastomotic strictures in 99, that was 38.2%, with post-esophageal atresia with tracheoesophageal fistula repair being the most contributed to anastomotic stricture in 96. This was closely followed by corrosive stricture in 96 cases, that is 31.1%. The other etiology were peptic, congenital, post-endoscopic sclerotherapy, and other causes. Comparing the corrosive and non-corrosive stricture group, the corrosives had a significantly higher median number of adequate sessions sessions for adequate dilatation when compared with the non-corrosive. That was 11 against 6, which was significant. And the requirement for as needed sessions was also significantly higher in the corrosive group. And the median number of as needed sessions was also significantly higher in corrosive when compared with the non-corrosive group. Coming to the stricture nature, that is short or long. Short stricture was defined as a stricture length less than 5 centimeters. There were 31 cases, and long end or multiple were 24 cases. The median sessions for adequate dilatation, as well as the requirement for as needed sessions, was significantly less for short strictures when compared with the long end or multiple strictures. Comparing the type of the dilator, Buji and balloon dilators for short strictures, we could exclusively use balloon in 23 cases and Buji in 54 cases with short stricture, and we saw the median age was low in the Buji group, and this was predominantly the endoscopist's choice. The median sessions for adequate dilatation and the median PDA for before adequate dilatation was significantly less in the balloon when compared with the Buji group. And comparing the their safety rates, the perforation rate was similar for the Buji and balloon, 0.51 against 0.37, not significant. The complication that we encountered were perforation in 14 cases, which was 0.54%, which were managed, 2 were managed conservatively, predominantly an event surgery, 2-stage surgery, and 1 death post-operatively, and 11 had desaturation events, predominantly with balloon, then followed by Buji, then on introduction of a Delscope and sedation related, and they were transient, requiring a bag and mask, brief bag and mask in only 3 cases. Assessment of growth, when we assess the growth in terms of weight and height Z scores, in the overall as well as in subgroup analysis by etiology, there was significant improvement in the weight Z score at baseline to follow up in successfully dilated children. Similarly, for the height, there was significant improvement in the height Z scores in the overall as well as in subgroup analysis by etiology in those children who were successfully dilated. Limitations of our study. This is a retrospective study, and hence it precludes from a completely unbiased comparison. Choice of the dilator was dependent on the endoscopist and not randomized. A significant proportion of cases were lost to follow-up. This might have influenced the outcomes. Coming to conclusions, the most common etiology of benign esophageal strictures in Indian children were anastomotic and corrosive strictures. Corrosive strictures were difficult to dilate, requiring a higher number of sessions compared to non-corrosive strictures. Endoscopic balloon and Buji dilatations were both safe and effective, with the former being more effective for short strictures. Successful dilatation resulted in significant improvement in the growth on follow-up. Thank you. I'd like to thank my mentors and all my teachers.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. Thank you.